Today we're at Whitehall, the mansion built in 1902 by Henry Morrison Flagler. Now, one of the interesting things about this incredible house is that it was built in just about a year, and they had about 1,000 craftsmen involved in the construction of the place. It's kind of a classical temple, but it's unusual in that it has a red barrel tile roof. And I believe there are 75 rooms inside which have been open to the public as a house museum for decades. John Blades has been the director here for a long time, and we have the pleasure of getting a little bit of time with him now to talk about the restoration of the dining room. So we're in the dining room at Whitehall, a room that has gone through serious restoration in the last few years. And when you look around me, you don't have a sense exactly of whether it's wood or it's plaster. Clearly you see a lot of damask fabric on the walls. But the wood itself is a very rare wood called satinwood that I'm most familiar with in terms of antique furniture. John Blades has been the executive director here.
Great to see you.
Good to see you again. For quite a while. But I just want to talk with you about what happened here in terms of restoring all of this, because it didn't look like this up until recently.
No, it didn't. In fact, this room hasn't been seen this way in more than a century. So it's a real pleasure to see it the way it was designed to be seen in 1902.
So let's recap the history.
Okay, sure.
Mr. Flagler dies in
1913.
And the house is then kind of closed for a number of years?
It went through a period of various things. It was a private home for a while, it was a private club for about a year, and then eventually became a hotel with the addition of a tower in the Mediterranean Revival style.
And what year did that happen?
About 1925.
So in the 20s and going forward for a decade or two or three, this dining room was part of a hotel, it was used as a dining room?
It was. In fact, there was a building built off to the side here where they had a check-in desk, and after you checked in, you'd walk through the dining room on your way into the hotel.
So you can imagine how much damage could have happened.
Absolutely.
To all this rare wood.
Absolutely.
So, John, tell us more about the actual restoration work. Who did it?
Well, we brought in two teams. One team to do the paneling, the same team that had done the furniture, by the way, and then one team to do the faux finish on the ceiling. So Cary Howlett and his team did the paneling and the fire mantle, and Chris Mills and his team did the faux finish on the ceiling.
This particular dining room is in the French Renaissance style, and it was a real convention beginning in the mid-19th century for these French houses to have dining rooms in this French Renaissance style. So the Cary and Hastings were kind of following in that tradition by creating this room. Where they departed from that convention was that those rooms tended to be dark rooms. They tended to be in European walnut, whereas Cary and Hastings and Potier and Stuymas decided to use satinwood and make a real interesting statement here with the satinwood.
So Potier and Stuymas and Cary and Hastings cooperated on these first four rooms, and they were at the peak of their careers. Flagler was, in the case of Cary and Hastings, is their most important client, and one of the very most important clients for Potier and Stuymas. So I think they pulled out of the stops here and decided to really make every room on this first floor super special in some way. In this case, by using Jamaican satinwood and making it so large and so elaborate.
And by the way, we haven't said, what is satinwood? Where does it come from?
Well, this is Jamaican satinwood, so there must have been a small forest of satinwood in Jamaica at one time.
As you can see from looking at the surfaces, satinwood, it can be plain grained, and certainly we have some plain grain. All the moldings here were made out of plain grained satinwood. But if you look at the panels, and you'll see that they're basically veneered panels, and it's book matched figured satinwood. So it's very, very lustrous wood. It has that quality that those of us who work with woods refer to as chatoyance, the cat's eye effect. It really gives depth to the wood, and you can walk from one side of a panel to the other. It just really has a depth to it that other woods don't have, which is what makes it such a highly prized cabinet wood. So it's native to the Caribbean, and it's interesting to speculate on why it was chosen for this room. I was talking to John Blades, the director, when he was in here a few weeks ago, and The fact that you've got some of the carved elements are definitely related to the sea. You've got dolphins, you've got the crabs on the mantle and so forth. It really does seem as though the designers of this room were very much interested in the sort of the tropical ocean motifs and so forth, and the fact that this wood is native to the Caribbean. It comes up as far as the Florida Keys. It is native to the Florida Keys.
But the paneling and the incredible carving of the mantelpiece and the ceilings, it's all basically the original. What condition was it in?
Well, what had happened during the hotel period, we think, is that they stained all of this satinwood very dark because that was more popular as a Mediterranean style, the revival style then that was popular, and then hotel edition was done in that style. And so when this furniture left Whitehall in the 1920s, it was probably stained very dark. And this room has been through a lot of changes, and we're now back to the original look. But during the hotel period, most of the furniture in Whitehall was sold off.
Sure.
And in this part of the story, we've been working since 1960 to recover this dining room table, the chairs, the double high sideboards.
Right.
They were made specifically for this room.
This room had been finished over, but it had never been restored before. I'd say 70 to 80% of my work as a conservator is redoing other restorers' work, because so often restorers in the past weren't real sensitive to the preservation of the original surfaces. And as a conservator, of course, I want to preserve as much of the original surface as possible. So we're using a really gentle approach here. It is a solvent-based approach that we're using. It takes a lot of time and a lot of repetitive applications of material, and then cleaning the surface with denatured alcohol and sometimes water to get the residue off. But it works. And we're able to preserve all the crispness of the original material, which is good.
Well, we managed to pull it off in 9 weeks, but that doesn't include the furniture. So the story is that this is a very dark room. Everyone assumed it was mahogany. We assumed the furniture was mahogany. And when we recovered the furniture from Old Republic International in Chicago, it was in their boardroom.
Oh, wait a minute. So you mean this dining table was in Chicago in a boardroom?
It was there for about 80 years, yeah. So.
And how did you find it?
Well, the founder of the museum was negotiating for its return as early as 1960.
Oh, okay.
And eventually we worked out, by 2018, I think, we'd worked out a deal. I'd worked with a couple of their executives over a long period of time. Finally worked out a deal to return it, thinking it was all mahogany furniture. That they'd carefully saved some of the original upholstery and other materials. They thought they had 4 sideboards. They really had split the 2 double height sideboards into 4, and they thought they had 4, but we knew they had 2 that just needed to be reconstituted. And we brought it back and sent it out to Cary Howlett, who's been a furniture conservator we worked with for a long time. And as soon as he took off the first layer of finish, he realized we had something very special. It was satinwood, solid satinwood, not mahogany. So all of a sudden our attention turned in a different direction. I knew then that if that furniture was satinwood, then this paneling had to be satinwood as well.
Sure.
And so we went back and looked at the records, and sure enough, the whole room was a satinwood room.
One of the things that I really objected to with both the furniture here, when I first saw it, as well as the woodwork in here, was that they had a really highly built up, very glossy finish. And when you've got highly carved surfaces, that doesn't work. It makes them look plastic almost. The glossiness of these highly built-up finishes kind of obscures the detail. You don't see the details of the carving nearly as much. Normally you'll see all sorts of residue of the early finish. And what we ultimately decided, and it goes along with some other research that I was doing, was that it was a very, very thin sealer coat of a natural resin, probably a shellac, followed by wax originally. You apply it very much like you apply what we refer to as a French polish. The shellac is actually rubbed on with a pad so it fills the pores of the wood. And the same thing is true of this wax finish. You kind of apply it with a pad and really rub it into the surface real well, build it up over many, many coats, and then buff it out. And it has a really wonderful soft sheen to it, which really shows off the carving to best advantage. When I was doing the initial study here, I noticed a number of moldings missing and some damage. Certainly we had a lot of that with the furniture. The furniture had gone through a number of hands before it came back to the Flagler, and the original carved cornices to the two massive sideboards had been lost altogether, so we had to reproduce those and really elaborate carving on those. And then one of the sideboards also had been narrowed, and there had been some carving repairs done in the past. That was back before the restorer obviously didn't realize he was working with satin wood, so he used a really, really dark wood. So if you look closely at some of these panels, you'll see some patches that were done with carving using a very, very dark wood. And in that case, we're going to basically faux finish those. The carving was nice, so there's no need to replace it, but we will make it look consistent with the lighter colored satin wood. The Flagler Museum archives has some really wonderful photographs, and these are photographs that are actually labeled Potier and Stuymas. So that's one of the key pieces of evidence that shows whose work this was. They were large format photographs, black and white photographs dating from 1902. And what's remarkable about photographs from that period is just how detailed they are. I mean, you're looking at a picture of an entire room, but you can actually digitize those photographs, scan them at like 1200 DPI or something, and then blow them up and see the finest details. It's just amazing what you can see. So we were able to recreate the design of the cornices of these sideboards from those early photographs. We had no other evidence other than those photographs. It is true that I think if you look at the project once it's completed and compare it to these early 1902 photographs, I think you'll see that what we are getting back to is very much the way the room was initially intended to look. And it should be good for, the foreseeable future.
Well, every ceiling here is cast plaster regardless of what it looks like, which is one of the reasons they could build this in just 18 months.
Yes, the whole mansion took 1.5 years to put together.
That's right. They took longer to plan it than they took to build it. So, yeah, so this is all cast plaster. And so we had to bring in two teams. One team to remove the finish and restore the look of the satin wood here in the paneling, the fire mantle. They'd already done that with the furniture. And then one team to restore the faux finish on the ceiling to make it look satin wood again, and to bring back some of that green wash that complements the carpet and the damask, the silk damask on the walls here. So,
And is there gilding in between?
there is gilding there, absolutely.
Has to be, it's the Gilded Age.
It's remarkably intact. Yeah. There's been mostly paint loss up there, and there must have been some plaster repair here and there. We noticed that there's a lot of gypsum, new plaster-looking stuff, particularly around the spandrels in the coffers. But we've laid some paint down. We've conserved what's there inside the coffers. It's remarkably in great shape. The gilding is great. We had to touch up with some minor losses, but it's not bad. But we've consolidated some plaster that needed it. But the wood graining, marbleizing at that time had become much more refined. It's been around for a long time, and we've often recreated and uncovered and conserved 18th and 19th century wood graining. So they faux finished it to match, to be very similar to what's down here. So starting with analysis, we kind of get an understanding of like how much has happened up there. And there's a lot more intervention up there than there is down here. The amount of detail in this room is just striking. It's remarkable. And so everything mattered. So we really had to go back and look. Like when they grained this up here, we couldn't end up with something going one way. They would have wanted this all to have some kind of symmetry. So we reevaluated that, and we were learning as we go. The analysis can help you so much. The analysis is great for seeing how many layers are on there, how many different campaigns of repair happened. There's new plaster up there. There's been several campaigns of people working on it. And then there was a decision, we suspect when everything went dark, that they changed the color scheme. So we have some narrative from 1902, I believe, that talked about this being green and cream. The only place that we could really get to was the frieze area. And that had a lot of evidence of what the glaze color was, how thickly it was applied, and what the base color was. And those two things are really important. The difficult part, I suppose, is the nuance, because there's so much. real estate up there. Like, what are the nuances of the finishes? Like, how soft are they? How bold are the figures? You know, you don't want the ceiling to compete with what's down here. So as we're up there, we were finding a lot of evidence of green paint tucked in a lot of the interstices and the deep detail of the carvings. So we know it's up there, and like, we deal in fact and we don't assume anything, and we try not to put our interpretation on it. We try, any fact is wildly important, so we latch onto that. There was green here. It wouldn't be there if what's it doing there? How much green was there? And so we keep digging in, and we did find little traces of green in cross-section. We can see it sort of tucked in. It's hard to see, and there's about 3 different kinds of greens up there. First, by taking samples, and we looked in the field here, trying to understand how many layers are on there, and you can see that the glaze layers are ephemeral. They're very delicate, and they're very thin. We could see it on the frieze because they used a casein paint, which we could get through, and we took that off and conserved it. So we do have reference to where we're at, and we have value chroma. So we recreate that exactly the way they did it, and we apply it with big round brushes. And so we try to get the materials correct. In a building, I guess around, this is the early 20th century, very early, late 19th century, so there was a lot of materials available. So we lean towards traditional materials. So when we started, this glaze is a turpentine linseed oil and pigment and dryer. So we're pretty sure that's what they did. It was milled, the paint was milled that they're putting into it. And most of that is like what we're working with, the colors that we see. But again, the difficulty with that is it changes throughout the room. And we started out where it was much warmer in tone, because that's our hand and our eyes generally want to see that, like warm wood, which this is. But in reality, it's not. You know, if we come and look on this side of the room, is different from the others. So we just have to constantly pivot and adjust and pivot and adjust. And there's a lot of sort of almost marbleizing going on up there too. There's for organic shapes that go on, that happens in the wood also, and in the fireplace. So we're trying to limit that to what we see. We've actually put some of these coffers back to actually where we see them. The camera from the early photograph was pointed this way, so we could see about 10 or 15 of them. So we put them back the way they were. So it's a lot of monitoring, and I'm often on the ground with a laser pointer, you know, trying to say too strong, too soft. Again, I can't stress enough, you don't want this to outshine what's down here. The idea of this was just for it to go away and feel like the same thing. So it's been a long process, and we still have a long way to go. We were going to put the color back in, we're going to put the green back in. We've introduced it on some of these panels, but there's a whole overglaze that happens here also. So it's an ongoing organic thing, and working with Cary too. As he uncovers things, we're noticing more and more things, and so we're constantly talking. This is an interpretation of interpretation, carefully orchestrated, you know, with as much information as you have.
The series that we've been doing at the reservation has focused on a lot of the craftsmen that came to Florida,
Right.
to create the Meisner mansions, etc.
Right.
Here we've got a Cary and Hastings building,
Right.
Whitehall. And was this done by Florida people?
No, this was done, as it turns out, there are only 4 satinwood rooms in the world, and they're all here in America, and they're all in museums, and they're all done by Potier and Stymus.
John, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
It's
Nice
great
to see you
visit.
again, Bob.
It's great to see you.